Hello and welcome to Coffee with Dr. Carla. I'm Dr. Carla and today I have ℂ𝕆𝔽𝔼 with me and we're really glad that you're here with us. And today our goal is to talk about some mental health related issues and the stigmas that seem to be around them, and hopefully we can break some of those stigmas, some of those myths. So thanks for being with me, and I'm curious, what is your take about nutrition and mental health?
Yeah, I think there's a big impact on food and kind of like mind and body. I feel like everyone's kind of gone through or like had like a bad weekend of eating. You're eating like a bunch of like greasy food or like alcohol or whatever it may be, and just like the next few days you just feel off, or you're groggy, or your brain's not working right. And I think that definitely can play a role in like you're feeling anxiety or you're sleeping bad because you're eating the wrong things, or before you go to bed you're having coffee or sugar and this and that, and then you're starting to throw everything off. So I think there's definitely a link between how food can impact us, our like mood, our stress, all this other stuff, and then that can kind of domino effect into even more stuff from there.
I mean, how can we figure out whether it's just a off day versus maybe our routine with food is really uh, throwing us for a loop?
Yeah, I feel like part of that, I think some of like a little bit of skill of like self-awareness and kind of knowing yourself. But I think too, if you start noticing patterns and like, oh, I feel like, oh, like this week, every weekend I go out to like out with dinner to friends, or like they have a family party where there's just a bunch of like fast food or this or that. You start picking up on like, oh, I feel worse like those weeks afterwards, or I notice like I'm feeling more stressed or on edge. I think if you start noticing those patterns, or if you're go out to a certain restaurant, I feel like everyone's got that connotation of like, oh, I eat this certain food, now my body's reacting this certain way. I feel like you got to start picking up on those things and noticing how it's impacting you, both like mentally and physically. And I think that comes down to being conscious of that and looking for it.
So I guess some sort of journaling or writing down what you're eating and how you're feeling
Yeah,
perhaps would be a way to start looking for those patterns. Are there certain things that you would suggest to a client to put in their journaling if this is something that they're wondering about?
yeah, I think definitely. I know there's a bunch of like apps nowadays where you can kind of track exactly what food for like calories and stuff. But like you said, if you're noticing like, oh, like I had this certain food, like you just put like, oh, like this certain restaurant, like I say like you're like, oh, I went to McDonald's, had this, or boom, this or this,
Right.
and then kind of connecting it with like, oh, how are my next few days after that? You might sometimes even feel it like immediately. I feel like people immediately are like, "Oh, I had this huge meal. I feel like I need to just lay down." I always think of like Thanksgiving dinner where you eat way too much food and you're like, "I
Right.
just need to roll down like and just lay and relax." And and you can feel that stuff immediately, but sometimes like those next few days after, like, "Oh, how am I feeling?"
Is it always about eating too much, though?
Not necessarily. I think what you eat too. I feel like one of like the big things that especially in America, we have like a huge like coffee addiction or sugar addiction, and it's like you can
Yes.
really tell. People talk about like, oh, like if I don't have coffee for like a couple of days, I get like migraines or this or that, and then you're losing your focus or other stuff. So it's like you can tell like there's certain foods that your body just gets used to and you build a tolerance for, and that definitely changes different things for you.
Right. I know that if I'm not careful with the dairy, I will have more of a have like a phlegmy throat and just stuffed up nose, and it's funny because my doctors swear that that can't be, but I mean,
I
and
feel it.
I'm not talking about like eating ice cream. I'm talking about like, I had a plain Greek yogurt this morning for breakfast, and I could feel a little bit of it in the back
Yeah.
of my throat. Now, I won't have one again for a long time because I know that that's happening to me. But, it's something as simple as that. Um, is there anything that you would suggest to clients that to maybe start looking at, like if they're like, I don't know what the pattern really is, but I feel like maybe I'm not as energetic as I could be. How might you decide to um, I don't know, get them started.
Yeah.
I guess is the best way to put it, right? Like where would you get somebody to start? I know we talk about little steps, but like what might some of those little steps be?
Yeah, I think a good thing, anyways, is to always be educated on like what is in the food you're eating. I think that's a good one. So like looking at labels and like foods and being aware of like, oh, what really is in what I eat. I feel like if you're having whole foods, like typically like I feel like people would be like, oh, like I'm having more like whole food diets, like fruits, vegetables, like usually feel a little bit better, feel a little more
Mm-hmm.
clear. Um, but especially with like nowadays, I feel like a lot of the food's processed. You have this and stuff. Not that you can't enjoy that stuff, but as long as you know what you're kind of doing, and I feel like being educated on it is a great start because then you can kind of start to decipher like, oh, I know like what this is and that is. Um, and then I think just slowly start gauging like, how do I feel when I like like add this food or remove this certain food from my diet. And then kind of like seeing like don't I feel like people try to do too much major things where it's like, oh, I'm gonna, especially with there's so many different like fad diets and stuff like that where
Oh
it's like,
yeah,
oh, remove like all carbs from your diet. It's like, yeah, you are gonna feel very off from that. Or
yeah.
or it's like, oh, remove this or that. And I think like just start slow, see how your body reacts with like different changes, subtle different things, and see how you feel. React. Give it a week or two, and kind of go from there.
Are there so okay? So you mentioned carbs, right? And I think carbs get a bad name, right? But they serve a purpose as well,
Yep.
right? So that's that quick energy. Um, when you think about the other types of food, what are some of their purposes? Because I think that when you eliminate whole groups of foods, that doesn't always work either, right?
Yeah.
So maybe just help our audience understand a little bit about what food's supposed to do fuel wise,
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's like a big thing. I feel like so many people view food as like an enjoyment thing or like a reward thing. And I think that kind of comes back to mental health as well. It's like, oh, I did this thing, I'm gonna reward myself, which is can be good. But food and nutrition is meant to like fuel us. It gives us energy. It's supposed to, if you're training for a marathon, you're eating specific foods so your body is ready and through that. And I think if you kind of think like that, like, oh, like I always like the metaphor of like, if you have like a very nice car, you're going to try to put the best like gasoline or, stuff
Right.
into it. And we don't really think of it with our bodies that way.
Okay.
And then you're not running as well or, so I think, like you said, looking at like, hey, what is this food doing for me? It's like you said, carbs really with energy. It helps with like the mental state. I know when people remove carbs, they're like, oh, I feel like foggy or like my brain is mush or like I'm
Right.
like a zombie. And like protein really helps like muscle and growth. Typically, people view it as, but there's other great benefits to it. You feel more full,
Right.
you're
Okay.
retaining more, and then fats are also a big source of energy. You usually get those from like nuts or like oils or like certain like animal stuff or oils, especially like avocado. I feel like it's the big one in the news
Yeah.
everywhere. Like all of it's trying to give you energy for certain things and knowing like, hey, do I need more energy like this day? Maybe I have a busier day or maybe not as movement. It's like all planning according to like what you need and what your body, because everyone's body reacts differently to different things.
Can you take the nutrition piece too far when you're trying to kind of adjust your nutrition to help out with your mental health? Is there such thing as going too far?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's levels to it, and I think you know you can always get super obsessed. There's so many like challenges like eating disorders, which I feel like have become very big nowadays. I
Yep.
I feel like eating disorders started off like seemed like a lot more oriented towards like women, but now there's a lot more research in like how like men and body dysmorphia and all this is playing a role. So I think trying to make sure you're still coming with it with a like good and open mind and trying to use it to like your advantage. Like it's like, hey, you still want to enjoy food. That's why I say like don't just take out whatever, everything and just expect that you'll feel good. It's like, hey, make these small steps, and everything kind of is in. To me, is all about finding balance. It's like you still can go enjoy like a beautiful dinner, than this and
Exactly.
that, or a dessert or anything like that. It's just finding balance and knowing how to best utilize that so you are still effective and going from there.
Cool. Um, I know you at one point you were like, "Hey, too much coffee." So I mean, yeah, maybe we should change our title to "Water with Dr. Carla" instead of "Coffee with Dr. Carla." But no, just watch us in the morning, and then you'll be okay. Just joking, but anyhow, thanks for that insight around nutrition and mental health. So remember, guys, you can change your thoughts and discover your potential, transform your life, all by focusing on your overall well-being. So until next time, continue on being the best you possible.